continue to update that as different countries go through this at different stages. I've been thinking of this breaking news coverage as I think the crisis management portion is almost over.
Yeah.
And we are settling into quarantine now, truly. I know that in the US specifically, all non-essential workers have been asked to stay home through the end of April. So we are treating April as quarantine coverage month. That means we are offering slightly more inspiration than service. And we are doing a few series that help you recreate destinations at home. One is called Our Happy Place. So we've had some of our top writers tell these beautiful little love stories about their favorite places that they try to revisit in their minds right now. Ryan Knighton told us about a place in British Columbia. Kelly Dawson talked about gardens in London. Allison P. Davis told us about Big Sur. And they're all these beautiful little narratives, right? It's not, everything has heart to it. We want to be the heart. We want to let you know that we feel what you feel.
It's not really the listicle time, right?
No, oh my God. Yeah. Imagine top 10 beaches.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But another one I'm excited to launch is called A Day in TK City, Paris, London, New York, recreated at home. So we are creating an itinerary. It's a little bit of a riff on the 36 hours concept in the New York Times, but we are going from breakfast to bedtime, and we are telling you how to make it feel like you are in Paris for a day. So everything from recipes you can replicate at home, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, to soundtracks for different times of the day, movies to watch, books to read, a local blog or a newspaper that you feel like you can sit down with your croissant in the morning. So we are leaning more into destinations now. But again, it's a little bit of armchair travel.
Well, and it's all, I mean, I feel like it's day to day too, still a little bit, right? I mean, you have this plan now, but it's, yeah.
Oh, we may scrap it tomorrow,
yeah,
right? Who knows? We're trying to read the trends, read the news, and be flexible.
Yeah.
And if I'm not rambling too much, Annie, I think the way we're thinking about coverage going through the next few months, it's, the doors will slowly open and our universe will get bigger and bigger, right? So as we are finally allowed to come out of our homes, I think we'll start rediscovering our own towns. I'm calling it the Thoreau Guide to Travel, or it's the idea of traveler in your hometown, right? So we're going to try to find out what's still open, what's not. So we're going to create a number of little staycation packages, probably in May. We also think domestic travel will rebound sooner. So getting into the summer, we'll start covering more road trips, hikes, state parks. We know that people will want to get outside, but I think they'll also still be very conscious of all the social distancing we've had to do. I do wonder how much this will change our culture. So
that's the $1 million question. But I actually, I mean, everything you're saying, I think is exactly what Clayton, I think a lot of us have been reading, Clayton, what you've been saying about the travel recovery happening sooner than we expect, which would of course go into your coverage strategy, Laura, but it's very encouraging. You've also laid out a strategy that is more than just hope. So can you talk to us a little bit about that timeline and how you're coming to these conclusions?
Sure. First of all, hi, and I've been kind of buoyed by these conversations because it does seem like hope's at the root of it. A lot of the travel industry coming together. But yeah, by the way, Laura, I love the idea of Thoreau and the local community, and that actually follows what we see in the data, which I'll come back to. Yeah, we're calling probably for a recovery a little sooner than others, based on a few things. One, we've looked at our data from past crises to include Zika most recently, swine flu, SARS. We've looked at how people rebound from terrorism attacks, and we see a couple things. One, we have a sentiment monitor in the marketplace right now with U.S. travel that's asking people whether they're going to travel or not, and still a full 41% say they're canceling their plans for the year. But when we track that back against behaviors of past crisis, we find out that as we emerge from this phase of fear, which you started to allude to, Laura, people begin to rebook, and they rebook at a pretty high rate. So we know that we can't really measure sentiment today, and that's why this monitor we're doing is going to be pulsed out over a number of weeks. But in the past situations, we found people come back to travel very quickly. That there are a couple things that are different about, of course, COVID-19. One, it's a much larger at scale pandemic than anything we've seen before. Two, it's hitting the world at a different pace. So I think it has the ability to influence travel recovery in different ways in different parts of the world. But I do think at its core is this idea of a massive pent-up demand that we in the travel industry know people want to travel. And that's not just on the leisure side, but on the corporate and group side too. People, I've used the term home sentencing. People want to get back out again and they want to travel. And we see that already in the numbers now. We have a subset of our traveler database we call resilient travelers, full 16% of people who say they travel right now. So there are early influencers, there are people over time who will begin to come back to travel. And there are people today who say they won't travel, who we know will rebook and travel very shortly.
Yeah.
You also asked about recovery trends. So yes, looking at global travel, we expect domestic travel to be first, and we expect leisure travel to lead out corporate travel. We do expect that community-based travel will be important. So not only populating restaurants, hotels, and attractions inside a community by the people that live there, but this concentric circle move out to regional destinations, long-haul destinations, eventually international trips. So those things are at play, and we would expect the progression to happen that way. But I do believe that, and we're looking at it post-crisis peak infections, plus 30, plus 45, plus 90 days. We expect to see those recoveries happen fairly quickly and for demand to be generated very quickly.
And you had said basically, are you still thinking like end of Q2, end of June?
It's hard to know, but there's some really hopeful signs. So we track a number of things, including we do a lot of social listening. Our paid search team is looking at paid search terms and what's being searched upon. So here's a hopeful note for everybody. We're seeing paid search key phrases at the same levels this week as they were in 2019 for summer travel. We see search terms like luxury travel spiking up. We know that Afar sees metrics along its content that's showing people are interested in travel still today. And what we think is there's this bifurcated recovery. So there are people who are going to have a lot of time right now. They're dreaming about traveling again. They're home sentenced, so they want to think about the way in which they can get out and travel. And those people will probably take some time to book, and they'll look at out months for long haul or more dream type destinations. But we also know the other part of this recovery is people who will rebook on very short booking windows, and who will, as they emerge from this fear, will want to take short trips, will want to get out and sort of dip their toe into travel. Yeah. And that means travel by car predominantly before air. It means staying probably in situations where you're induced through a value or some kind of special offer. Those things tend to follow in every crisis, those sort of comeback metrics.
Nice. Thank you so much. And thank you for the evidenced words of hope. That's good. And I've heard, I think the buzzwords, at least for me, will be trust, safety, and flexibility. And I kind of wanted to throw that to everyone, but I guess I'll start with maybe Paul. I mean, do you agree with those buzzwords? Do you think there's other buzzwords going to be really important to travelers? I mean, you run an enormous travel agency. If I can use that $1.4 billion number, I mean, that's a huge travel agency. So what do you think?
Yeah, it's funny, Annie, because I was thinking about this. I left my law practice almost 36 years ago now to start this business. It was a little travel agency my father had that was struggling. And we are doing less business now with, I would say January was the biggest month we ever had in the history of the company. Wow. We're growing 20% year over year. And we're doing less business now than when I took over my father's little travel company that was doing about $1 million a year in travel in 1984. So that it's just shocking and stunning on so many levels.
That's a full circle that you don't want, right?
I'm sorry?
The full circle that you don't want.
Exactly. Well, I mean, but to follow up, what Laura and Clayton said, look, we are social animals, human beings, and what is happening now is so anathema. It's just you can't keep people isolated for that long. And I think that what's going to happen is, safety, health, and flexibility are the key words that are going to help to get people to start opening up. And I think maybe Clayton mentioned this, but the first people that are going to go are the intrepid travelers, and the young people like my kids who've been cooped up. I mean, they've already all had the virus, frankly, and they were recovered and they're fine, and they were relatively asymptomatic. They were in New York City, and all their friends, they've got cabin fever. So I think there's going to be a huge surge in demand. It's going to lead on the leisure side of my business, and then I think as people start to sort of venture out, the corporate travelers will follow. And I think at some point when health, safety, and trust and whatever, that may mean different things. It may mean to get on an airplane, you need to show a certificate that you're either negative or that you have antibodies in your system. And the airlines are very smart, and they will figure it out. And doing that in conjunction with, incredible offers that they're going to offer. I mean, we've been through so many of these events, and I think it's my fault because I said way back when, nothing could be worse than 9/11. And of course, we had an office in the Trade Center. And then, of course, the global financial crisis happened, and I ate my words. And then I said, well, nothing could be worse than the global financial crisis. And then here we are now. And so this is clearly my fault that I keep saying those and jinxing our industry.
Stop saying that. No.
Yeah, I'm going to shut up now and let somebody else talk.
No, this is really the bottom. This is really the word. I think that's
God willing.
But I mean, Lila too. I mean, you run this really wonderful, lovely, boutique, successful agency. I mean, your clients have a lot of money. They travel a lot. They're texting you now, right? I mean, they want to be traveling. They can't. I mean, are you kind of feeling the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think trust, flexibility are going to be huge. For me right now, I'm what's kind of top of mind for me is perception. I think, how consumers are perceiving the situation, how they're perceiving when they can get back to work, when they can get that revenue stream again, is going to directly play into when they feel like they can travel and when they can feel like they can start planning travel. So perception is one of those key words with me right now for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's listening to clients, and everybody's different. Everybody's threshold for what they're comfortable with is different. Their financial situations are really different. So yeah, as a small agency owner working directly with people, I've always listened. I'm listening, and I'm paying attention to their behavior, because I think their behavior is going to tell me, what the next steps are and how things are going to start opening up for people.
Yeah. And I think for someone like you too, I mean, your clients look to you to be on the road, right? And they're going to look at you traveling, and
right,
especially because you're so close to them on the ground.
Yeah.
Martin, I wanted to ask you, it seems that destinations are really embracing the stay-at-home directive and helping consumers plan for later. You guys did this amazing video and campaign, really, Dream Now, Travel Later. How did you come up with that? And, what are other ways that you're ensuring that Switzerland is top of mind? I actually had a question come in today that said images of a clean, perfect Switzerland are going to be sure to resonate well with travelers. So how will you handle the demand?
Well, it's, to be very honest, everyone was taken by surprise. So there was obviously no chance to prepare for such an event. As an organization, we really hit hard, and we had just two phenomena happening at the same time. We have to stay at home and basically manage all our offices and the entire operation from home. Plus, no one is basically doing what they usually do. So it's like two things that are hitting us simultaneously. And as you mentioned before, I think there are some very important keywords. So it's important for us. There are two main tasks at this very moment as a destination, as a country. Number one is finding the tipping point when people are receptive again for tourism messages, which is not necessarily the same thing when they're going to travel. And the second task is to find the right tone at the right time. Because obviously we have stopped and banned all marketing activities at this moment. This would be ignorant and a loss of money. And you have to now use the right tone, and we chose the tone of empathy, and traveling in Switzerland is not possible at this moment, but dreaming is. To be inspired for future vacation, that's basically the root, the base of our campaign. So it's it's I would say a limited campaign. It has an expiry date. The moment we are open for business again, this will be the end of this campaign. And then we need to make sure that we have a smooth transition into the next campaign. And that needs to be equally empathic, because we cannot basically just pull a lever and everyone will be in the precise same mood as a couple of months ago. I think there will be a substantial amount of visitors who are hurt and hit hard at this event. And only when you lift the physical bans, I think it's going to take a while until they actually travel. So it's very important that we find the right tone, basically. That's the basis of our work at this moment.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are some glimmers of hope in Switzerland. At least I saw that they are going to slowly start lifting restrictions April 26th. Is that right?
That's correct. I assume we're a couple of weeks ahead.
Yeah.
We follow this wave from east to west. Our offices in China are up and running again, so that's some rays of hope. But it's like an early indicator system, and you can see precisely that phenomena. Mobility is up, offices are open again, they're lifting bits and pieces of the barriers, of the borders, but people are still a little bit resilient, and it is very, very obvious that domestic tourism will come up first. So I think the first winner of this crisis will be domestic tourism.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're considering it as like the Swiss will come back first to see their country again, and then slowly the rest of Europe, and then from there the rest of the world?
Yeah, yes, exactly. And you can also sense the intercultural differences, how people are different. It's lovely to hear how optimistic you guys are. It's great. If I'm in a panel with people from East Asia, it's a little bit different tone. You know, they're a little bit more prudent and reluctant to go back to business immediately. They are a little bit more scared, and so I think in different parts of the world will handle this crisis and the aftermath in a different manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the one thing we keep understanding, is that it's not going to be a day-to-day light switch kind of situation. Thank you so much for that. Lindsay, I have loved for a long time, you have a mantra, believe in travel, right?
Yes.
You have more than 700, is that right? A lot of them independent hotels. And when we were talking about believe in travel, when we were together at ILTM in Cannes, we were talking about it as a response to our kind of the over tourism, right? That we still should believe in travel, and now it has a completely different meaning. And hotels are such an integral part of the travel experience. What are you doing? Like, what is your empathetic approach right now to these hotels and the consumer and the advisor world?
Yeah, it's I think believing in travel right now is more important than ever. Like you said, the tone of that message is completely pivoted, to use Laura's word. We have 750 hotels in about 85 countries, 50% of which are closed at the moment, whether by government mandate, low occupancy, or, I mean, all of them are concerned about the health and safety of their employees and their guests. So it's a really challenging time for all of us in the industry. So empathy is huge. And I've learned that in crisis and times like this, you can never over communicate. Community is becoming even more important. Providing them relevant content and information. I mean, a lot of the things that we're doing outside of trying to offer relief where we can is hosting town halls to give them information about what we're hearing, because the majority of them are independent and a lot of them family owned. Just having access to that information of what's happening in certain parts of the world with the travel trade on the group sales side, you know, that's really, really important. But even more important, it's doing things like this, is that sense of community. You know, they say a burden shared is a burden halved. So the ability to bring our hotels together to talk, to share about what's happening in their markets and their hotels, best practices, has been incredibly important. So we've got that customer segment, but the travel trade as well as the end consumer are also our customers. So keeping in touch with those segments is important. The end consumer side of it, we actually just surveyed our loyalty members, I prefer loyalty members. And it's interesting, you can tell people have a little bit more time, because I think we got 3,400 responses within an hour. Said a lot. but the sentiment is a lot more positive than we thought. And again, it depends by segment and part of the world, but I think some interesting things definitely align with what's been said. I mean, leisure travel is going to come back fastest. People are anxious to visit their friends and family that they've been cut off from, as well as there were so many celebrations that have been canceled. That's whether it's weddings or birthday parties or graduations. And I think there's going to be a quick response to do that. And my favorite response, we literally got this, so that was the number one response. And the number two was to relax and or party after this is over. So clearly on the leisure side, people are ready to celebrate. And I agree that there's going to be pent up demand. But I also think an interesting statistic was 60% of our surveyed respondents definitely plan on traveling in 2020. But the majority of them said that they probably want to wait between 4 to 6 months after travel restrictions have been launched to do that. So I think it puts it in perspective in terms of the desire to travel, but maybe some might wait a little bit longer before they book certain types of travel. But we're trying to be as empathetic and supportive. The travel trade community is hugely important to us. And I think that they're going to be the front line in terms of being able to communicate all of the relevant information that the end traveler needs. There's so much information right now that they're really the ones that can distill that and I think help the traveler figure out where they should be traveling, what's safest, what's the best values. I mean, air travel, obviously, I can tell has been dramatically impacted. So that piece of it's going to be really interesting to understand even where you can travel to in terms of airlift. So
yeah, and I said this last week, but I mean, planes are cleaner than ever, and they're not going to go back to being dirtier. So that's also a plus. Like we have these pristine airplanes. I did actually. It kind of goes into what you were saying on dates. I mean, I had a lot of questions about specifically, would you recommend people book trips in September? Like we have an Afar sailings in November and we feel pretty good about that. I mean, how do you guys feel about September? Clayton, you feel good about it.
Well, I would say to what Lindsay's comments, again, in our surveys that we've been doing it through every crisis, people do tell us it's going to be a while before they travel, but with time that changes.
Yeah.
So I actually do think that people will book, even though today they might say it's 4 to 6 months, it's likely shorter than that. The other thing I would say is in every recovery, what happens is there's this bifurcation of demand. It either moves up market or it moves down market. So the real concern for people who are trying to recover should be, if you're in the mid-market, how do you react? Because people will either trade up because rates will come down, or they can't afford the rate in the middle and they have to move down. And so that's an important part of the way you think about this. And the people who typically will trade down will be the people who will travel first. Luxury will be fine. I'm going to set that aside. But in terms of immediate leisure, short-term demand, people will be looking for a deal. The industry will respond by lowering rates, and people will want to action on that. Even today, you see the airlines continuing to show fares for future travel. They've all relaxed their booking and cancellation policies because they want to drive demand today. They want to try to collect whatever they can in terms of cash flow around those bookings. And they're signaling to the traveler that we will let you book and change it later. So if you feel like you're comfortable in September, to use your example, Annie, go ahead and book it. And if it comes to be August and you don't feel comfortable, we'll let you change it then.
Yeah.
So, and I think the way suppliers are responding should be a really good indicator for us. Airbnb today announced a number of measures that tells us they think demand is going to come back soon. If you look at even what Marriott is saying, and they've been very hard hit, they're starting to build back some timelines for capacity that look at mid to late summer and fall. Yeah. So those things to me feel optimistic and could change. But for now, I don't think you can trust the consumer completely when they say, I'm not going to travel, because they're still gripped by fear. And they all look around saying, I can't imagine myself at a sporting event, on an airplane, on a subway, et-cetera. And again, we would argue that will moderate over time.
Yeah, and I do think it is different with the luxury traveler and with the different types of travelers. I think luxury travelers will be, like you alluded to, the first to come back when everything is restricted, when the restrictions are lifted. There also is a specific question to you, Clayton, about will people hold off on plane travel until there's a vaccine? I
saw that from Laura. Hi, Laura. So I don't believe that. First of all, I don't think I'm not an expert in this area, obviously, but I don't think there'll be a vaccine until well into next year. I think people will more likely look at, and I think this was mentioned earlier, maybe by Martin, I think people will be more likely to look at government response and private travel supplier response. When the green light is given by governments, by municipalities, by private operators, I think people will feel permission to start weighing back in. And I don't happen to think that's going to be tied to a vaccine. It could well be tied to better testing.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's going on in South Korea and China, for example, they have very substantial testing policies and immediate testing where they are tracking the virus and making sure people who are, I mean, Wuhan has traffic jams again. I mean, they are full on, 85% of capacity has returned in China. But they are testing people in a much more holistic way than we are in North America to try to get a hold on who could still possibly pass the virus.
Yeah.
But vaccine, I think, is probably not going to be the tipping point.
No, and of course we don't know. I mean, it might be like the flu vaccine, right, where it's 60% effective, and we don't know what that kind of vaccine will look like. So, Paul and Lila, I mean, would you say September? Would you book trips now for September and put your trusted voice behind that?
I've been hearing from a lot of clients that they are definitely looking for opportunities, and because of the flexibility issue that they're not going to have to worry about cancellations and not getting their money back, they're thinking this is a great time to book. Far out. I'm talking fall and winter, and I think the suppliers have a big role in helping encourage and facilitate that. I just read right before this call started, one of the more innovative airlines has been Delta in terms of, extending frequent flyer privileges. And I just heard that they were going to be not selling and blocking all middle seats. So they're starting to sort of have that conversation with travelers and to start to get them comfortable that they will be safe when they fly. And so I think that, we talked about the vaccine. I think vaccine is, as Clayton said, that's far off. But what will happen sooner are antiviral responses, antiviral drugs, and as well as that in combination with testing, I think will combine to make people feel more comfortable. And again, as I said before, I think there's going to become a tipping point where people will start to hear from whether it's their colleagues at other banks, if they're a banker, or their friends at their club who are booking a trip, and they don't want to be left out. There's going to be some kind of a tipping point where people are going to say, oh, really? If Joe and Sally are going, well, maybe it's safe and maybe I should book and hold something. And so when that happens, our advisors, who are communicating constantly with their clients are going to start to get busier. Hasn't happened yet, but I can see it coming soon.
Yeah, and like Laura said at the beginning, I mean, April is basically quarantine month, and so that's, I mean, something that's really stood out to me is that this is the planning time. I mean, I never have enough time to plan trips, right? I mean, this is the time where you can really be looking at restaurants and guides and things like that. Lila, are you encouraging that with your clients, that kind of planning process, or is it still a little too soon, or what are you seeing?
I mean, if I'm already working with someone on a trip, or if they have a trip planned, yeah, look, I mean, I absolutely am planning with them. What I'm not doing, I mean, I've taken the approach to not reach out to clients who don't have anything planned in 2020 to talk about travel.
Yeah.
Being very hands-off in that regard, and it's not ignoring it. It's not. It's just being sensitive and empathetic to the situation. So if clients don't have anything planned through 2020, I'm not in touch with them on this. I've not sent out a blanket statement or announcement from my agency. But if any client reaches out to me about planning something for July or August or September, absolutely we're planning. I mean, I have a client right now wanting to go to Asia at the end of July with his family. That one's honestly a little bit challenging because, I don't know what the border situation is going to be like in Southern Asia at this point in time. So it's that one's a kind of tricky, but I I have a client who reached out about Greenland in August and sent a proposal out last week. So it's very individual. And I think perception is going to play into behavior big time. And I think it's highly individual. Even within my client base. I mean, I have some clients who I'm like, absolutely, there's no way they're going to cancel. They basically travel as part of their lifestyle, and they're canceling something in October. And on the flip side, I have, a family of 6 with a trip to Italy planned at the beginning of June. And I'm like, they're going to be the first ones who are going to cancel. And they're holding out. They're waiting to see what's going to happen because they really want to make it work. So again, it's perception, and it's for me, it's just treating every traveler individually. If they want to plan, let's plan. If they're not reaching out, I'm not reaching out.
Yeah. Well, you said Italy too. I mean, Italy in June, if it's open enough that they can go, I mean, that might be a really great time to see it without the crowd.
It's going to be a super special time to see it. I mean, I was, not to take up too much airtime, I was in India just before the world basically clamped down, the middle of last month. And and I will probably say it was the most special trip of my life because of the situation. There weren't many tourists. There weren't many travelers. It was super raw and authentic. And it was like traveling eons ago. And I think that when things open up, some of those destinations that may seem a little scary right now, I think for those travelers who are going to go into those destinations, they're going to get an experience that explorers and travelers got decades ago. I truly believe that.
I love that. I love that feeling because it's kind of been lost, right? And the over tourism talk that we had talked about for a long time, and we'll be continuing to talk about because it's important. But I did also I had a lot of questions about operational changes. Maybe I'll ask you, Martin, if you guys have talked about this, an effort to soothe travelers' safety concerns. I mean, Switzerland, of course, has always been considered very safe, but is there an extra level that you're hearing from your partners locally about cleanliness or sharing rooms or bus tours or things like that?
Absolutely. I think these are very important determinants because we were just talking about the tipping point, and obviously what determines the tipping point? I guess it's the reliable sources of governments who are in charge of health recommendations, but also of travel recommendations. So I think everyone is turning to those trusted sources now. And another determinant is, I think, people are very, very perceptive of how countries are managing this crisis at this moment. And we can see both sides of the spectrums. I think you can see some countries who are handling it rather well, and they slip out of this crisis, hopefully and probably a little bit earlier. And others are maybe lacking the competence. And maybe that has also an effect then to the reputation. Now, where does Switzerland stand in this spectrum? I hope on the positive side. I think our government took fast actions. That's why we are now looking at towards the end of our quarantine. We think that in another 2 weeks or so, we might be soon out of it. And that means we are preparing for the second half of the year. So you're asking us, what do? We are very, very positive and confident that we can save the second half of this year, which includes summer, which definitely includes autumn. Autumn, which is basically a phenomenal season for Switzerland. And what helps is we might not be the most fun country, but I think at this stage of life, reliability, trust, purity, safety are probably attributes which are have a positive influence on your travel demands. And we know all these attributes are not necessarily travel motives, but if you don't have them, it might be a exclusion factor. So we are very positive that the reliability which Switzerland stands for will help us in this moment. And the way our government handled the situations I think they did a great job. That spreads confidence in Switzerland as a travel destination.
Absolutely. You've been getting a lot of good press for even like the small business loans and things like that just automatically get moved into people's accounts. And it's just very easy and seamless, which of course the US is not used to as much.
Exactly. I think it's also important how the country deals with the people. Like we have these short-term employments. Basically, Switzerland as a country has two main goals. We want to avoid as many bankruptcies as possible with the loans, and we want to basically make sure unemployment will be as low as it was before. So that's important how you deal with your people, with your population.
Absolutely. Lindsay, I had actually a question specifically for you about what advantages are hotels going to have in the new landscape, because you have so many of these unique properties that are family owned and have these personalities. But how do you kind of show that they're all clean and safe and ready to go across the board? Are you guys thinking about that as well?
Yeah, of course we are. And I think there's two phases to that. There's this rolling recovery phase that's going to take place. And then I think there's full recovery. We've got a quality assurance program that where we inspect hotels on a regular basis, but also kind of through all the social aspects, we're able to monitor that. But we're talking to a lot of our hotels, and those that are open have obviously put in place ways to communicate what they're doing from a health and safety standpoint. So whether that's if somebody's checked out of a room, they keep it unoccupied for 72 hours before they then go in, and they have completely new cleaning protocols. Most have obviously limited food and beverage, but they're allowing a lot of more of the delivery processes and kind of how they're controlling that to keep their guests that are in house safe. So I think there's part of communicating now for the hotels that are open, for the guests that are there, the safety that's involved. But I think as the full recovery takes place, it really is going to be about hotels communicating their enhanced cleaning protocols. I think you're probably going to see a lot more things. I think keyless entry is going to probably all of a sudden take off a lot more now. I think removing some touch points that people might be a little bit more wary of in the short run. I do think that there'll be some shifts in how food and beverage is handled. Even, literally the white glove service concept might come back. I think you might see a lot more hand sanitizers in public spaces, and even shift in some of the products that they're using in room, which I think in the long run is good. But crisis creates creativity, and I think that hotels are being very diligent about this, and certainly so are the airlines. I mean, I agree it's probably the safest time to get on an airplane right now because them better than ever, and there's a lot of space. So I mean, I think that our hotels, the one thing we keep telling them is just that communication is the most important, whether that's what's on their website, on their collateral materials, how they're communicating via social media, which right now is kind of the lifeblood because most marketing has kind of pivoted to that. And I said, showing the stories as they reopen and as they have guests, that the health and safety of their clients is first and foremost. So they're all doing that, and they're doing it in creative ways, and we're trying to kind of share that information with them as it relates to best practices.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that kind of personal human connection approach always works. Like just, joking about, are we going to shake hands again? Are we going to, no one knows actually, that kind of thing. Laura, I actually had a question for you about how this has forced a lot of us to embrace the virtual. Do you see this trend continuing in the travel media space after this is over?
That's a great question. I think there will be a rush of people to get out and experience humanity again. And I think virtual will take a dip. But I do think people are discovering new types of feeds and ways to explore that they hadn't thought of before. And just the idea that so much can be offered for free, right? Like Andrea Bocelli doing a concert at the Duomo in Milan this Sunday for Easter. And even just John Legend performing in his living room. I think there will be better access to places that are typically maybe roped off. And I think that as a discovery tool is going to be more powerful than it was before. I think people will be more used to it. And even that is a barrier, right? Like grandparents are using Zoom. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. It won't be as important, but it'll definitely be something that we can continue to surface.
Yeah,
I think.
Definitely. I think, Paul, I had a question for you about, have you, running such a big company, have you learned any lessons during this time about what you'll take forward, maybe leaner and meaner, or, some good things that you're seeing that is going to come out of this?
Yeah, obviously, one of the things that I think we're all learning in the business world is that as much as you can prepare for worst case scenarios, this is so far beyond what our worst case scenario ever was. I think the airline, all those smart MBAs and the airlines also, we're all kind of in the same boat in that this is a black swan event that really nobody could possibly have foreseen. And so, cash is king now. And I think in the future, at least the way we are going to run our business, I think we're going to be a little more cognizant of that and making sure that we have the staying power to outlast, I hate to say it, future pandemics. I hope it doesn't happen. And I hope that we've all learned a big lesson from this one. I mean, I think our government was woefully ill prepared, and the fact that we're playing catch up in every single area relative to countries, other first world countries like Switzerland and others, I think is a disgrace. And I think is, whether that will, that will changes will be made in terms of our election coming up. We'll see, but so I think that there's a lot we will have learned from this, and I think we will be a smarter company. We'll be hopefully a smarter country going forward, and I think we will learn some very smart lessons, and hopefully the next time something like this happens, we will be more prepared.
I just had a question come in too that said, crisis creates creativity and innovation. And I think we've all seen that the past couple of weeks with these virtual things. Some of them work really well, some of them don't. Do you guys have any examples of things that you're doing at your companies that are more creative or different than, things that you just wouldn't have done before?
Yeah, so I'll give an example from one of our luxury advisors who I just saw his email. I mean, all of our people are communicating regularly with their clients and, enabling them to dream, which is what they want to do. And so that when they're ready to travel, they'll be, calling them first. But one of them, who's very creative, just sent an email out giving recipes from I think it's the Connaught Bar, has two great drinking recipes, and just to stay in front of them and just to get them to start thinking about maybe going to London and going to the Connaught and having a drink, and the recipes that you could make at home. So there's a lot of creativity that is being sparked by this crisis, and in terms of how we communicate and how we maintain and build on the relationships with our key clients. And I think there's some really great lessons that are coming out of that for the future.
I'm making friends that I never would have talked to 3 months ago because I didn't have the time, right? And now all of a sudden I have these new friends that will be real friends, right, when this is over. So I think absolutely. And Laura, we're doing the Travel at Home challenge, right? And that's...
We are. I wanted to bring that up. I skipped my mind as you were talking about virtual travel, but our Afar social media manager came up with this really clever idea to do #TravelAtHome challenge. And she posed it to our staff and asked everyone to kind of come up with a little travel moment that they could recreate at home. So I have 2 small children, almost 3, almost 1. And I asked my toddler to pretend to be a little bull, a mini bull. And we did running with the bulls in Spain in our backyard. I wore all white with a red cape. She wore a little Passover cattle mask and all black. And she just chased me down the driveway. And it was a hit. The New York Times just covered it this week. So a lot of different, we've seen that extend to our readers. It's fun, right? I mean, like you mentioned early on, Annie, it's hard because we want to allow ourselves to both feel fear, but also to know that it's okay to have a little fun while you're at home, to laugh and to smile. So I think we're also doing self-care a little better when you mention what are we doing that we're not normally doing. So many people on our staff are taking up baking bread, right? And signing up for dance classes and workouts online. I went running for the first time in 3 years. So
big accomplishment.
I'm curious what everyone else is seeing or doing.
Yeah, and I wanted to just sort of close. We have just less than 10 minutes and kind of go around the panel and just ask, what is one thing giving you hope right now, or one thing making you laugh? If maybe start with Lila. I can see you up there first.
So much is making me laugh. No, I mean, I think what's giving me hope, again, I keep going to where I was literally days before having to get, rescue people out of Peru. But I was traveling through India, and that time was so special. I mean, it had to be done differently because things were changing, and actually India closed their borders to new entries while I was there. So, I mean, we were having to change things, but the specialness of that trip, it honestly, like I said earlier, is just giving me hope, because I think that the way that I'm going to do things is naturally going to have to change. But then I think about my suppliers on the ground. I think about DMCs, on-sites, hotels, restaurateurs. I think about everybody that's having to do things differently. And someone mentioned the word pure, and that's another one of the key words that I've had through this whole thing, is just pure and purity. I think that coming out of it in the very near term, the very immediate first travels that are going to be happening in 2020, I'm hoping are going to be very pure and very thoughtful from the travelers, perspective, but also from hotels and on-sites. I mean, they're having to think about doing things completely differently. You can't look at the way that you did things a month ago. So I'm really hopeful that things are going to feel really, really authentic, close,
Yeah,
and pure, like traveling decades ago.
I love that. Lindsay?
The TV show Tiger King on Netflix is keeping me very entertained from our standpoint. But from a hopeful, positive, I just think it's the renewed sense of community that's taking place not only within the travel industry, but literally in our own backyards. And that there's businesses, whether it be restaurants that have shifted to almost acting like grocery stores, to those that are just offering, like you said, free virtual fitness classes or training classes. There's just been a lot of community where people have said, I'm going to do this for free, and I'm going to open up my doors to give as many people access. It's been inspiring. And I think it's just a shift in the way people are looking at giving back in a really difficult time of crisis. That keeps me going.
Thank you. I love that. Clayton?
Well, I agree. I think seeing the creativity that people clearly exhibit in these situations is hopeful. I'm a little bit more cynical about people returning or changing their behaviors broadly over time. I actually think, if I think back to a lot of these other things we've covered, people tend to return to norms. It depends on how long it could take time for some of that to happen, but I'm a little bit more cynical that suddenly people are going to be more altruistic or suddenly change wholesale the way they travel. I don't, I guess, fundamentally believe that. But I do think the one upside to this over time will be that governments especially begin to recognize the importance of travel as an economic lever. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next year with funding formulas around DMOs, with the way in which governments have stepped in, especially government airlines, to save those airlines. Because I think sometimes people forget how big, it's the second largest industry in the world. It's a massive GDP contributor. And I do think that the upside to this will be people's recognition that travel has to be protected, and that from an economic standpoint, it's one of the most important industries globally.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like we've talked about, that advisors are key to that, because they're like, Lila got her clients out of Peru and they wouldn't have gotten out if it wasn't for her. So those kinds of relationships. Okay, I'm going to speed through. Paul.
Yeah, so I'll be quick. Have to give a quick shout out to my good friend Matthew Upchurch, whose quote I will say, "Never underestimate the power of human connection." And so I agree with him completely. Having gone through, this is now my 36th year in this industry, we have been through, for those of you like me who are trying to celebrate Passover, I look at this as the 10 plagues on the travel business. We started many years ago. We had the commission cuts, for those who remember. I'm sort of the eminence grise on this panel as I look at everybody. Airline bankruptcies. I mean, two Gulf wars. Do you remember SARS, the ash cloud, Hurricane Sandy, of course, the 9/11 and the global financial crisis. So I'm not sure if that's 10, but I think that's enough. I think that if we've gone through that as an industry, and we, all of us on this call, and the panelists as well, have come out. We've survived. We've gotten stronger. We've learned lessons. I am extremely hopeful that this is going to be in our rearview mirror very soon, and we could all get back to business, and we'll have learned some great lessons. So that's fine.
Paul. Thank you. And Martin, what is making you laugh or giving you hope?
I'm actually with Paul. I think this is an evolution acceleration. I think we'll come out stronger. If I just look at the development we made in these couple of weeks in terms of digitization, I mean, I would probably never have been so fast with our organization if we had a top-down management decision. So this has really brought us forward. And I am very hopeful for the second half this year. I think Switzerland will be back and open for business for the second half. That gives us hope that the year is a terrible year, but it's not over yet. We're in April, and we have many months to go. And what makes me particularly laugh is, I don't know if you have this in the US, but we have this absurd toilet paper hoarding, and I love the reaction on the internet about it.
A lot of toilet paper memes out there.
Yeah.
Ellen, I'll throw it to you to close. I mean, there was a question specifically for you about, has this pause made you gravitate to the places you love, or is it going to make you want to see other places? And because you're such an accomplished traveler is what the question said.
Well, thank you, Carrie, for that question.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting question, because I believe that not only have we talked a lot about human connection, but there's a lot of empathy that we've related here that needs to happen even deeper. And the voice of Afar has been truly empathetic, and everyone here has shared a lot about what the empathetic approach has been. And I think that travel decisions, certainly mine, will be to support those friends in the industry that I really care for and have visited and enjoy, and the people that work for them that I know. And I think that there is something to that for everyone. If you care enough about a destination, a specific hotel, a cruise line, an airline, if you care about Afar Media, if you care about, Preferred, or any one of you, you're going to support them now versus trying to spread your wings too far and too thin, and you can't really make a difference, at least initially. So I will absolutely travel straight away, and I will go to the places that I love and support the people that I care about, because everyone needs to be supported right now. So that's, that leads me to thanking all of you, the panelists and the audience. And really, this is a time where together we will get through this, and together we will grow and learn. It's fascinating, even LDR, as I call her, Laura, has started by talking about the phases of content and how that's resonated so deeply with our audience. And one week to the next, everything changes. I mean, we heard that, we're out of crisis management. Well, stay tuned, because next week, Thursday noon, we're going to talk about crisis management next week. So it's really kind of not over. We're still in quarantine. We still can't travel, and we need to have the right tone, as we heard today. Not being tone deaf is a very critical piece of how we communicate. And I know that together we will get through this. I urge everyone to continue to listen to each other, care about those people who you love, and also those who might need you right now. And this is an industry that will prevail. We are, as Paul has mentioned several times, he's been through many of these moments, but this is a time where I know we will gather together and make it through on the other side. And I'm grateful to all of you. This, has given hope to everyone, I hope, on the call. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next Thursday noon, and we'll continue to do these as long as you'll have us.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Thank you guys so much for joining us and taking the time. I really appreciate it. This is so much more than a job to a lot of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night, day, morning, wherever you are around the world.